Now in its 5th generation, the Nissan Pathfinder is a familiar face in the Australian market, and these days it shows its American roots more than ever. But not only does this new Pathfinder wear a bold new face, but Nissan Australia claims that it's more capable and rugged than ever, so much so that it can probably bring the fight to something like a Toyota Land Cruiser Prado. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. But before we dive into the nitty gritty of why exactly this is, let's take a look at the 3 best and the 3 not so good aspects of this Nissan Pathfinder Ti that costs $70,030 before on-road costs are added. First up, I want to talk about this bold new front end, because not only, as I mentioned, does it make the Pathfinder look more American, but the light design is really cool and gives us a very intimidating look when you see it coming down the road with those daytime running lights on. And then there's this new interior in the Pathfinder, because I mean, it's just stunning. You've got impressive tech up here and in the driver cluster, soft touch materials across almost everything, and it just feels premium. And lastly, I want to talk about this big 3.5 litre V6 that powers the Pathfinder, because once upon a time, in the large family-friendly SUV category, these were plentiful, but these days, with fuel economy being a priority, you don't really see them. So I do appreciate Nissan bringing it back. But then again, while all this talk is good to use on the road, it brings me to my first negative point, because in comparison to something like the Toyota Kluger Hybrid, the fuel economy in this really suffers, so I guess it's a payoff you're going to have to live with. And then there's an overly intrusive lane keep assist system in this Pathfinder, which I'm not a fan of, but thankfully there's just one easy button to push to the right of the steering wheel to turn it off. And lastly, though Nissan Australia is pitching this as a rugged, somewhat off-road type SUV, there's no option for a spare tyre, so you're stuck with a space saver sitting beneath the boot back there. So as I mentioned before, there's no going past the premium feeling of this new Pathfinder's interior with its 9-inch infotainment screen that supports wireless Apple CarPlay, but I mean, if you're an Android user, you're going to have to plug your phone in, isn't great. And then behind the steering wheel sits a 12.3-inch digital cluster with analog gauges on either side. And then on the topic of driver tech, you also get a large 10.8-inch head-up display that projects on the windscreen, so it isn't one of these strange fold-up screen systems, and it's good. On the amenities front, there's a USB-A and a USB-C port, as well as a 12-volt socket. And on the Ti, which is this grade, and the Ti-L, you also get a wireless phone charger. All the climate controls are housed beneath this infotainment screen, and there's still good old-fashioned buttons. On the practicality front, the door bins, they're pretty sizable. You get a pair of cup holders here, and speaking of that, there are actually 16 cup holders throughout the interior of this Pathfinder. In terms of the fit and finish, soft touch materials cover the majority of surfaces that you'll be touching whilst driving. There is a bit of piano black thrown into the mix on the doors and the center console here, but it's not a lot, so I mean, it's excusable. On the Ti grade and the vehicles below it, the driver's seat has power adjustment, but the passenger has to do with manual controls. If you opt for the range-topping Ti-L, it means that both the driver's and the passenger seat get power adjustment seats. Back here in the second row of the Pathfinder, the premium feeling continues with soft touch materials covering the majority of surfaces and the leather seats being super comfortable. In terms of practicality, headroom, it's plentiful, legroom, there's a heap, and it's got a perfectly flat floor, so whoever's blessed with sitting in the middle seat here won't have to awkwardly straddle a transmission tunnel. The Pathfinder comes standard with tri-zone climate control, meaning back here in the second row, you not only get access to fan speed, but also temperature control, as well as heated seats, which is a win in my books. There's also a USB-C port and a USB-A port for charging your devices. But don't forget the cup holders, because you've got 4 in each door, as well as a pair here. So each rear seat occupant can have up to 5 drinks. I'm not sure you'll want that, but hey, it's an option. So as standard, the Pathfinder actually comes in an 8-seat configuration, meaning that you get 3 seats across the second and third row. But with the wheel wells impeding on width back here, I wouldn't want to be the one sitting in the middle seat because space is very tight. Opting for the range-topping Ti-L variant somewhat remedies this because you only get 7 seats, but then the second row is made up of a pair of large captain's chairs. So while space isn't exactly plentiful back here in the third row, you do get 4 cup holders in total, as well as a USB-A charging port. Opting for any Pathfinder above the entry-level ST variant gets you a power tailgate, and when that opens, it gets 205 litres of space with a third row of seating in place. This jumps to 554 litres with just the second row up, and when both rows of seats are folded, this figure jumps again to 782 litres of space. As I mentioned before, there's no full-size spare on the Pathfinder, just a space saver that sits beneath the boot, and because of that, you also get access to this cool little extra space. And finally, it's also worth noting that this Nissan Pathfinder is rated to tow up to 2.7 tonnes braked, which is better than some of its rivals in the segment. Nissan Australia claims a combined fuel economy of 10.5 litres per 100 kilometres when it comes to this new Pathfinder V6. During testing, we found that it actually do 10.6 litres per 100 kilometres, which is already remarkably close, but then you add on the fact that we were towing a jet ski during this test, very impressive. In terms of servicing, Nissan Australia offers a capped price plan for the Pathfinder that covers it for up to 6 years and 90,000 kilometres, which costs $4,206 in total for the four-wheel drive models. If you want just 5 years or 75,000 kilometres of coverage, this will cost $2,581, and it's also worth noting that service intervals are every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres. This Pathfinder is also covered under Nissan Australia's 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. So when it comes to this new Pathfinder, Australian buyers have just one engine option, and that's the big 3.5 litre petrol V6 that makes 202 kilowatts and 340 newton meters of torque. As standard, this generous helping of power and torque is sent to all four wheels through a 9-speed automatic transmission. So there's no denying the V6 underpinnings of this Pathfinder on the road. The power and torque is plentiful, and the noise, it's also there. And speaking of that 9-speed transmission, the Pathfinder also comes standard with shifter paddles behind the steering wheel, which might feel a little redundant in a family-friendly SUV of this size, but hey, grabbing gears is always fun, no matter the vehicle. Though Nissan hasn't given us a 0 to 100 time for this Pathfinder, I doubt it would be overly fast, but it does feel quick for how large this SUV is. Torque is plentiful across the rev range, and I'm sure overtaking won't be an issue on the open road. If I do have an issue with this engine, it's that it doesn't feel overly refined in 2022 in the face of its rivals, such as that Toyota Kluger Hybrid. There is something that I love about a seemingly large displacement engine in a big family SUV, but it just feels a little old-fashioned in modern times, if I'm honest. Drivers have access to 7 different driving modes in this Pathfinder via this toggle switch down here. For on-tarmac stuff, there's normal, eco and sport. When things get a bit harsher off the beaten track, you've got sand, mud and ruts, and snow, and then there's also a towing mode that sends more power to the rear wheels to help manage heavy loads. In terms of an all-round drive, the Pathfinder is very well-rounded actually, and thanks to some updated suspension componentry, body roll has been reduced from the last generation by 28%, and that is genuinely noticeable through corners because it remains very composed. Along the same lines, the steering is a bit quicker, but as is symptomatic with any large SUV, it's pretty vague, and even though Nissan has said that they've increased the speed, it still feels a bit slow in my eyes. Despite this, there is a nice feeling to it, and the firmness gives you a sense of confidence in the system. But if there is a standout for me when it comes to driving this new Pathfinder, it's definitely the ride, because it feels like one of the most refined Nissans that I've ever had the pleasure of driving. It's a very refined ride, and I guess you kind of expect that for an SUV that weighs this much, but it does take a lot to lose its composure. Throughout the Victorian roads that we've been driving on the launch of this vehicle, I haven't found any areas where the Pathfinder is particularly uncomfortable, and even over the rougher sort of stuff and the off-road loop that we did, it barely ever lost its composure, so I'm really impressed. On the safety front, Nissan's full ProPilot suite is standard across the Pathfinder range, meaning that things like AEB, blind spot monitoring, and adaptive cruise control come standard. While the system is very competent, and the cruise control system is particularly good to use with its handy notifications when the speed limit changes, I do take issue with the steering assist because it kind of railroads you into the middle of the lane and forcibly feels like it's taking the steering away from you if it feels you're not sitting in the center, which I'm not really a fan of, if I'm honest. So as a whole, there's no denying that Nissan's new Pathfinder is a thoroughly impressive vehicle, and though it's actually shorter than the last generation Pathfinder, superb packaging on the inside makes it feel bigger. My biggest issues with this car lie in the fact that V6 isn't overly economical, especially in modern times when its rivals are moving to hybrid powertrains, and also the fact that Nissan is pitching this as a somewhat off-road vehicle, but I mean, you're not going to go too far off the beaten track with that space saver. So as long as you're aware of this, and you're happy to feed that big V6, the Pathfinder will be a great fit for you and your family. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.